Our World Media Network. Some of you may be familiar with me in the New York area who are viewing and listening. I've been in radio, I hate to say, almost close to 50 years. I'm semi-retired, but back in the day I was at WBLS, WLIB, 1010 Winds, Air America, worked with some wonderful people, and about 10 years ago I decided to drop out to do other things, and some of you might have heard of me venting my hostility as I was leaving, but it's a big world out here, and I have been given through my gracious friends at the Our World Media Network, Pauline Swift, Joe Swift, Glenn Greenwich, and many others, an opportunity to come back to do something on my own. I've been off and on as a guest in many other areas of the media in the last 10 years off and on. But this is like going back to the old days and doing things on my own. And those of you who did not know me before, you could see from my face why I was in radio. But that's another story. Just glad to be here. The name of the program that we're starting is the Urban Algorithm. And I'm just speaking metaphorically that we're hoping to provide a platform weekly here that we can discuss some of the vital issues in our urban community. Urban meaning Black, Latino, people of color, as opposed to the general market, to solve some of the problems that exist. One of the things that inspired me to get back into this business was the last 4 years of the Republican administration in Washington, D.C. And I don't want to eat up a lot of time talking about what happened then, but anyone who's lived in this country back then and has known some of the problems that we've experienced as a people and what's going on today, just to bring things back, to build it better, as the incumbent president says. They need a lot of help, and this is my little contribution at this point in my life, and I'm hoping that it works out. Anyway, before we go any further, I want to introduce a very good friend of mine. I am honored and pleased that he would take the time to come on this show, my very first show, and I owe him a lot. He's a financial guru. He's my guru. He's a walking anthology on anything finance, and his name is Haru Niket. He is based in Brooklyn, and he is president of the Insiders Group. And this is Haru, who's next to me on screen. Good evening and greetings, Haru, and welcome to the Urban Algorithm.
Good evening. It's such an honor to be your first guest. I really thank you, for this opportunity.
I owe you big time. I mean, it's funny. For those of you who are not familiar with Haru and his operation, even mine for that matter, but I met Haru at the beginning of the last epidemic that we had financially in this country about 10 years ago. We met at a career day at a local school in Brooklyn. And, I told him what I was doing after I had stopped, retired allegedly from the business. And, he was telling me some of the things that he was doing in terms of starting this operation. You were already involved with Insiders Group by the time we met, right?
Yeah. I started in 2004.
Okay, 2004. So that even predates, because I think we met in 2010 or maybe 09 or something like that. But I think it might have been 09, because I left around 09, 10. I was still on someone's payroll, but I left. And the deal is that when I think about what was going on then, and the height of the crisis of what was happening in the country, a lot of us were in disbelief. This is at the end of Bush II's second term, and this is before Obama. And at one point, it was before Obama.
Obama was 08.
Yeah, right. But we were. Yeah, very beginning of Obama, and we were in crisis. I remember back in the day, I would do shows on WLIB and BLS and talk about the importance of owning property, that people, who were struggling out there, just to empower themselves, to have something to fall back on, something to pass on, generationally speaking, within their families. And one of the biggest assets that I've always thought that was important to me, because I'm into tangible assets as opposed to playing the stock market, was property. And the properties that anyone had wasn't worth anything. And a lot of my friends at the time, they were telling me to sell, try to get out of whatever it is that you're doing. And Haru, I credit you as among those few voices out there that told me to hang in there, to hold on. And I'm so glad that I did. Of course, no one saw what was coming last year, but 10 years ago, that was the deal. And I'm forever grateful for your advice. And as I, honored that you're my first guest, but I still owe you a whole lot in terms of the wisdom that you've passed on. So without going any further, I wanted to ask you a number. I know we had a number of talking points, but let's start with what's going on currently with the terms of the economic problems that some of us in this country are facing, and yet others are doing very well. What do you envision in terms of 21 and 22 with the cities and the country supposedly coming back?
Well, it's an interesting thing when we say coming back, because coming back has always been regional and conditional. And so when we talk about this idea of coming back, people who were still hurting from the last economic downturn, there are people who are just starting to recover or just getting on their feet from the last economic downturn, and we're talking about 2008, are suddenly finding themselves deeper in positions where they're hurting really badly. So it's going to be a long time for them to come back. Are there opportunities? Absolutely. Are there going to be hurdles? Absolutely. So when we look at the big picture, we had this sudden closing of everything. So you have mass unemployment, you had landlords not being able to collect rent, landlords not being able to pay mortgages, businesses, basically everything shut down completely. So you had this mass shutdown, which meant that, for periods of time, you're talking about a year and a half, people weren't really making money. However, ironically, you had a situation because there was some money that came in from the government. We saw more savings, currently than basically any time in history. And so we also saw this new emergence of people getting into things they'd never done before. So they call the retail or the Robinhood investors. We saw people investing in the stock market. So we saw all those things. But when we talk about 2021 and recovery, we saw a sudden reopening. So what happened when we saw the sudden reopening? A lot of people weren't able to get back to the jobs they want to. And so the jobs that opened up, they're underemployed, meaning, businesses can't find enough employees to take the jobs that exist, because the high paying jobs never left, right? People were home doing those jobs. But you're talking about people not being able to really get a job that makes sense in 2021. We see this massive inflation. The question for 2021, is that temporary or is that, the new norm? And part of the reasons we saw this inflation is because it's based on supply and demand. You have this new rush of money coming into the system because everything's open. You see all that money that was saved is suddenly coming out and wanting to be spent. Some people are back to work, but now businesses don't have the supply. And so if they don't have the supply, then it causes inflation. The question is, can they ramp up the supply? Meaning they have to get raw materials. If it's manufacturing, they have to get employees that are willing to work to be able to build up the supply to meet the demand. And will the demand taper as this sudden rush, starts to taper off as things become normalized? So we're definitely seeing at least short-term inflation. Interestingly enough, the stock market, because all those people flooded into the stock market, is doing well, because that's based on supply and demand as well. We see mass migrations of people A lot of them moved out of the urban centers into more rural areas. So you have places like Des Moines, Iowa, Idaho rather, where they're seeing threefold increase in property value. So we're seeing these pockets, expand, and we're seeing. Then we look at places like Baltimore, where they were just starting to recover, and they shut down. What is that going to do now to their economy? We see places like Philly and Detroit, places that were just starting to get on their feet. I don't think we're going to see this massive growth like we see in other places. New York, of course, will bounce back like it's nothing. So we're going to see it mixed. We're going to see some places where you're going to see booming opportunities, and you're going to see some places where they're going to struggle for a long, long time.
It's interesting because some of the Republican talking points when you hear the talking heads on TV, they talk about this government money that the Democrats have doled out to help the economy, and I'm not saying this as a proud Democrat. I mean, looking at the whole landscape objectively, had there not been some bailout money, had there not been anything offered aside from the vaccines, this country would have been in a world of mess. So
absolutely.
What happens now when you hear them talk about, well, we should not be extending unemployment, we shouldn't be giving the party or the government shouldn't be as so charitable so that people will find the need to go out and find a job?
Well, talking points are talking points with the Republicans, right?
Right.
Just being oppositional. However, a lot of money was given out quickly because it had to be done that way. Meaning that the level of screening that probably should have been done wasn't done because it was a crisis situation. So there were people who were in dire straits who definitely needed the money. There are people who were just on the edge who benefited greatly. It kept them above water. And then there were people who really didn't need the money who got the money, right? And so it was this mixed bag. And I think we're in a position now where you can adjust the screening process, because before it was no matter what your situation was, if you met the income requirements, you got the money, right? And I don't think, and there are some people who needed more money who didn't get it, right?
Exactly.
So I think we're in a position now where there's enough reopening and there are enough jobs available that you can now start screening a little better and saying, okay, and say, right, who really needs it? Because again, regionally, there are places where there are jobs available and they can make a living wage, because that's important. There are jobs available where they can make a living wage and the jobs are being unfilled. And then there are places where people can't take those jobs and survive, so it doesn't make sense to take the jobs. And then there are some people, who are taking advantage of, let me get the extra money as long as I can. It's human nature to want to be what we call efficient. Some people call it lazy, right? To do as little as possible and get as much as possible. So that's just part of nature.
Mm-hmm. And there's no regulation of that. I mean, it's just a question of whatever your immediate needs are. I met a young lady at an insurance company a couple of weeks ago, and she was telling me she was happy staying home collecting money, but she knew at some point that would probably run out, and she found herself back in front of her desk again. At the outset of this program, you mentioned opportunities. What would be some of the opportunities that someone who is probably in need of help would like to work and do something for self, which I think is part of your philosophy, doing for self?
Well, I'm always about financial freedom, so you don't end up in predicaments like this. I think a lot of people who were innovative and creative realize that certain technologies exist now where you can be home, 100% home, and be able to utilize the technology inexpensively to reach a broad market, and to be able to make money in new and different ways. It's interesting that, we saw Zoom take off, and I've been using Zoom for years, and it didn't really take off until people were forced to stay home. So we see this acceleration of innovation, the acceleration of the use of technologies that are low cost but have a broad reach where people can make money. So there are also opportunities when we talk about in real estate, because we saw this massive flight, especially from urban areas, like we saw in Manhattan, this massive flight. So those prices went down, right? And so there's opportunity to slide in there and be able to take advantage of that because prices are going to bounce right back, in no time. We have to look at the world a little bit differently and realize that people are more comfortable receiving, goods and services remotely, right? And so when we saw, all of a sudden we saw this explosion of everything being delivered remotely and but using an
Oh
app.
yeah.
There's a new trend for that. Information being delivered, via like we're doing now, right? We're live streaming, as opposed to doing a live seminar. So, there are plenty of new opportunities because people were forced to use new technologies that are again relatively inexpensive, to what they were before.
Well, let me ask you, Guru. Is it possible that you could pinpoint perhaps one industry that you envision will be successful in the next 6 to 9 or 12 months?
Well, let's do this. Let's not even talk about an industry. Let's talk about broader areas, right? And so one thing we saw with the retail investors, because we have apps like Robinhood, right? It used to be very difficult for people to figure out even how to invest in the stock market. And I'm not saying that individuals should do this without the knowledge, right? But when we look at the ability now to, everybody can own Google. Right? Google's a strong company, but you can own now fractional shares, where before, a single share cost you $2,000-$3,000. It priced out the average person, but the average person can now, own $10 worth of Google if they want to, and still get the same percentage return. And so now when you have free trading, when you have fractional, investing, and you have a ton of legitimate, places where you can learn how to analyze. Now, I'm not talking about some kid on YouTube telling you how they trade. I'm talking about actual investing, where you have these legitimate places will teach you how to value invest for the long term. That's an opportunity that didn't exist prior to the pandemic. And even in the broader sense of that, you don't really have to learn how to invest if you just did an index fund, right? An index fund, it's hard to beat the market, but an index fund covers the entire market. And so it gives you an opportunity to be in the stock market and average a good 10% return for the rest of your life, just in a simple index fund and now they have zero cost index funds. So you're talking about free, basically. So that's an area that prior to the pandemic didn't exist. And now that opportunity is going to grow.
So places like Vanguard,
Vanguard, Fidelity,
right,
E-Trade, legitimate places. I would run from Robinhood at this point because they're too young, and they cater to a no, they are right. They don't have a long history. They almost had to shut down because they didn't have enough cash reserve.
Exactly.
So I would go to the more seasoned places that allow you to do fractional, stuff too. So
it's interesting as you mentioned that. I had to ask you this before time runs out. Bitcoins. I have a buddy of mine. He worked in radio for many years for the great Stevie Wonder, and called me the other day and said, "You got $5,000 laying around. I could get you money. I could double this and that." And everybody down here in Florida is doing it. I'm not going to call his name. And I'm just saying, I'm a little taken back by that, because my thing is, if it ain't backed by the FDIC, it ain't for me. What's your take on Bitcoins?
Okay, so, all right, just so the audience, if they get a chance, look up Tulip Mania, and it is exactly the same thing. There's this mania over these, what people think is getting rich quick, and there's no such thing as getting rich quick. It's speculative, it's volatile. As a matter of fact, in the last 3 months, it's dropped about almost $30,000 in the last 3 months. It has no intrinsic value whatsoever. There are no fundamentals as to why it goes up or down. It is not a currency. Now that people aren't even really calling it that, they're calling it a hedge against inflation the same way they used to use gold. But it's not a good hedge if it's so volatile. It will not replace a dollar. It will not replace anybody's currency. They tried to create, they acted like it was a solution to a problem that didn't really exist. And so Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies are attractive to a particular demographic who has distrust in the government, who wants to rebel against the norms of society, who really don't understand investing or financing at all, or economics at all, and it's alluring, and it's like a game, and it talks to your emotions about you can get rich quick and beat the system, and the reality is you're going to get burned in the long run. So I have no faith and confidence in Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency whatsoever, and it will run its course. And it took Tulip Mania 50 years to run its course. So it might take Bitcoin 50 years, but it will run its course, and it will crash and burn.
Yeah, I tell you, I'm really curious about it because my guy's no dumbbell, the one I was talking about in Florida. He's an attorney. He does broadcasting. He's still on the air. I'm not going to call any names. But the deal is, he was telling me a lot of people in our business are investing and they're making a ton of money. And, I'm glad that at least, maybe money immediately, but it may not be something that will turn around, as you said, or it wouldn't be a safe harbor to be parking your boots in.
And I think people misunderstand. Again, when people say investing, people keep saying they're investing in Bitcoin. You can't invest in Bitcoin and make money. People are trading Bitcoins and making money, right? When you talk about investment is a long-term thing and is based on certain fundamentals. So if I invested in, say, Google, because I mentioned that, I would look at that company's financials. I would look at that company's products and services. I would look at that company's growth. I would look at so many fundamentals, what they call PE ratio. I look at all these things and be able to make a decision as to whether or not I should buy Google, even at the price that it's at, right? And so you don't have that with Bitcoin because there are no fundamentals to look at. And people who don't understand investing just chase the dollar sign. When they see a dollar sign go up, they think it's time to invest. Where you started off the show, I was telling you when the prices were down was the time to get into real estate.
Gotcha. Right.
When everybody else was scared. So as an investor, we buy low and we sell high.
Yeah. I kind of gather this isn't a good time for real estate now. With this is like a seller's market, I would imagine.
And again, it's regional, right? And so there are some places where nobody wants to buy right now. And so if we look at, again, the fundamentals, if we go to, okay, let's go to city planning and see what the expectations are. Let's see what type of funding is going to certain places. Let's see what infrastructure is going to certain places. And those places, even though they're depressed, there are plans and money and political will behind it, then those are good places to buy. But when we look at, certain places that are really attractive right now, because we do see people running in certain places, it's not like in Arizona. It's not a good time because, again, it is a seller's market when they're getting 2-3 times what it was worth prior to the pandemic. So again, real estate is funny because it's very regional.
This is a global audience, and we only have like a minute or two before we have to bring our next guest in. But when you look at all the overgrowth that's going on, the development in the city, particularly the Bronx and Brooklyn and all that, can it sustain itself? I mean, can you find people to put, especially with homelessness the way it is? Do you have a quick response to that?
Absolutely. I think we have a shortage of housing, and we have a huge influx of money because the tech industry came to New York. And so we have a lot of money, and we have, absolutely sustainable. The market in New York, the numbers are going to continue to go up.
Okay. Haroon the Cat, it just seems like we just started a couple of minutes ago. I hate to say that we're out of time, but we are certainly going to have you back. He is the president of the Insiders Group. They're based in Brooklyn, the People's Republic in Brooklyn. And Haroon, if you could just give out your phone number or a public number that people to reach you.
Well, I think the best way, since now everybody's on social media, I have a great, not the page, but the group, Insiders Group Inc. on Facebook, Insiders Group 1 on Instagram. I have a YouTube page as well for Insiders Group. So I think that's the best way to really see what we're doing right now.
Haroon, thanks again. Honor and a pleasure. I'm glad that you were part of my first show, and we'll have you back again for sure.
Thanks a lot.
25 minutes past the hour here at Our World Media Network. Back in the...
Worried your friend's struggling but don't know how to reach out?
You could say, how are you, or get a fake tattoo. You could ask with an app if it works for you. You could write them a text or knit them a sweater. If you can't be together, you could write them a letter. Whatever gets you talking. Whatever gets you talking. You could chat on the game, kick off your flip-flops. You can ask on your couch while you binge watch. However you do it, you gotta ask a friend. And if they don't share, you can ask again. Whatever gets you talking. Whatever gets you talking.
There are a lot of ways to reach out to a friend about their mental health. Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org.
I know what you're thinking. I need a job.
I need a new career.
Well, I've been there.
I've been there.
I've been there. I wasn't happy with what I was doing.
After high school, I didn't have a plan.
I just wanted to start working.
I got laid off twice, but you gotta keep
You
going.
just need the right skills. Find an apprenticeship.
I found a 2-year IT program.
I found a medical course online.
I'm now a consultant in the tech space.
You have more options than you think. You can do this.
You will find something.
You will find something new.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
And we're coming up with 27 minutes past the hour. This is the Urban Algorithm on the Our World Media Network. I'm your host, Wayne Gillman. Some of you may know me from my past work in the New York area and across the country on Air America Radio News and the NAACP, blah, blah, blah. I could give them all my credentials. This is who I am physically. It's my first time on camera in quite some time, and I hope I'm not embarrassing myself by doing such. But I'm glad to be here, and truly, it's an honor to bring on my next guest. He was here with us a couple of weeks ago, but this time I get a chance, selfishly, to interview him myself. He is the former chief of police here in the city of New York. He is worthy of commissioner status in many municipalities. I consider him like a guru when it comes to police work. And we are living at a time when his knowledge and his background is so important to get his word out. And it's amazing that he's not running for mayor. I want to welcome you to our Urban Algorithm, Dr. Wilbur Bill Chapman. Good afternoon. Greetings, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you back here again. And I don't know where to begin. There's so many things that we could talk about. I guess I'll start this week. A couple of days ago, we had the second mayoral debate. And I know the first show that you did with my colleagues, Pauline Swift and Glenn Greenwich, that you were supposed to make an announcement in that show as to who you would support. Has that position changed since the last time you were on?
Not much. I'm a little disappointed that a person that I thought would probably be a significant change in the political tide, Ray McGuire, had his campaign go basically on operational silence. Looking back at Mayor Bloomberg, he was a person who came out of private industry, was extremely successful, and ran the city in a fiscally responsible way because of his business acumen. Looking at Ray McGuire's resume and seeing how well he did at Citibank, which is not exactly a equal opportunity employer, means that the man clearly had the grit and probably the credentials to run New York City. Unfortunately, we haven't heard much from him, and it looks like his candidacy is kind of dead on arrival, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I looked at him and I thought he had a lot to bring to the table, and I know that there are others out there who probably would disagree, especially the other candidates he was vying against. But having watched the debate the other day, I'm just amazed. I'm a little disappointed about the entire canvas, to be honest with you. I'm not saying that I would have voted for McGuire. First of all, I can't vote in the city of New York. I'm not a resident here anymore. But the deal is that what goes on in New York City affects me, and affects my business. So I want to make sure that we have the right person in the field. So I was wondering if I threw out some names to you. I know this is like throwing a match on gasoline, but if you don't mind, I guess I'll start with Maya Wiley. Your thoughts?
Maya Wiley is a very interesting person. She clearly can do the icky shuffle well and make a very nice margarita. But if I were a defendant in a civil rights case, she would be my attorney of choice. However, she is part of a number of candidates who are too close to the current mayor, who is an abject failure. So if she couldn't run CCRB, which she left very quickly, and her only achievement at CCRB was bringing the charges to the police commissioner on the officer who caused the death of Eric Garner, then that's not a very qualifying resume to be the mayor of the city of New York. It's also interesting that all the political ideologues who supported her, when they saw that someone else was gaining in the polls, magically took the other person as their second choice and almost abandoned Ms. Wiley at the dance. So I would just correct her if she's going to continue to make statements about the police department. Number one, yeah, they carry guns, and we will continue to carry guns till the end of time. And number two, the police commissioner is a civilian. So her appointing a civilian police commissioner is really not saying much to the public.
You know, I found it interesting. I don't know if you saw the last debate, but it's almost like as if she was. Oh, okay. So you know that she was somewhat reticent in responding to that issue of having people, police carrying guns and all that. That she felt that wasn't the place and time to come up with an answer.
Well, that shows how unprepared she is. All of the other candidates, it's sort of like, do we need to wear shoes when we go out in the street? Yes, we do. That's just part of the human condition. There are other countries where police officers do not carry weapons, and that's wonderful for those countries. Considering the level of gun violence that's occurring now in our city, it is reckless to even suggest that police officers not carry guns, or even to not answer the question affirmatively right away.
Mm-hmm. Okay, moving on, Catherine Garcia.
Well, very interesting. She was the go-to person for the last 10, 12 years, as she says, and she was very interesting. It's very interesting how she criticized her former boss, saying he was great at planning and poor execution. I think some of that also refers to her. I remember when the streets weren't plowed during a massive snowstorm. And the idea was, well, we'll get GPS for the sanitation vehicles who are plowing. Well, why didn't you get it before the snowstorm? And the garbage was piling up long before the pandemic. So don't blame the pandemic. And having been the former commissioner of the New York City Department of Transportation, I know about budget cuts. In 1998, Rudy Giuliani and his budget guy, Joe Loda, said that every agency had to cut 17%. And it's very interesting that almost all the commissioners did. None of them quit, as did Garcia. And there is a way you can cut 17% from a budget without impacting personnel, without laying off a single person, or cutting back on the vital services or the basic services that your agency provides. So by failing to plow the streets, remove the garbage, and quitting.
Oh, very interesting. And I gather her early departure had much to do with her thoughts about running for the mayoral position, but I don't know.
It's convenient that someone departs in administration, can endorse it and say how wonderful it was, or attacks it, and decides magically, I'm going to run on the record that I had while serving in that administration. Bit hypocritical.
Scott Stringer.
Scott Stringer is probably the one candidate that has the most citywide experience. As borough president, clearly as controller, he has done a fantastic job managing the pension funds. I have a vested interest there since I'm collecting a pension from the city of New York.
I hear that.
Unfortunately, yeah, I better watch what I say, or they'll divest my pension. No. Scott is a very soft-spoken individual and is paying for maybe having consensual sex with somebody 20 some odd years ago, and being in a bar with someone else said he was inappropriate almost 30 years ago. The pearl clutching people and woke people in New York have deserted him quicker than they do when a skunk enters the room. And that's really a shame, because he's a guy that clearly knows the business of city government and would have been a very competent mayor.
Yeah, I thought so too. I mean, when the accusations started coming forward, it seems to be so easy today for somebody to just assign blame just based on something that happened 1,000 years ago, whether it happened or not. I'm not saying that, someone shouldn't come forward and express their grievances, with respect to that. But, I don't know if there's ever going to be a time, if you're going to run for public office without being scrutinized to the level where something like that will come back to haunt you.
Well, there has to be a balance as well. It's interesting. This isn't the first citywide office that Scott ran for. He ran to be the controller. He ran to be the borough president. And these allegations, if they did occur, if this activity did occur, it occurred long before he ran for citywide office. So therefore, why are we waiting till why is someone waiting until this point? It just makes you question the timing and the rationale behind it. Of course, I'm not on social media, so don't look for me, all of you haters who think that I'm supporting someone who may have sexually harassed a woman. I'm not. What I'm saying simply is that someone has to investigate this. And when this came out, the reporters, and I blame the media somewhat, yeah, they ran with the story, but did anybody go back and see if it was true? You cannot unring the bell, and that is probably costing Scott Stringer the mayoralty. The fact that he cannot, even if he didn't do it, he can't take the thought of the allegation out of people's minds, and that's unfortunate.
You're absolutely right, and I think, unfortunately, it may affect him going forward with anything that he may want to run for public office again. We did McGuire. Andrew Yang, your thoughts about him?
Andrew Yang was a breath of fresh air. There are people who are attached to the mayor, and there are those who aren't. And if people are looking for a change in city government, you want to support someone who is not allied with this particular mayor. Andrew Yang certainly isn't, but he didn't help himself when his campaign manager said he was an empty vessel. That wasn't helpful at all. And I think that's done him some damage. Whether he can be an ecumenical candidate representing all people, I think that's a likely situation. However, he's really got to overcome the fact that he's becoming more of an identity politics candidate rather than a general candidate for all people. Christine Quinn is a perfect example of that. She got involved in identity politics, and I think it cost her the nomination.
Interesting. Well, last but not least, we're going to go to your former colleague who was in the police department at a time when you, I guess, were grooming him. And he seems to be in lockstep to getting the position according to the polls. And especially this past week, I'm surprised.
Well, if you look at the polls and two media outlets, it looks like he should be picking out the color of the curtains in City Hall. Right. However, if you step back and look at the candidate as a whole, I don't want to go back through his history, because with all politicians, they tend to distort and elaborate on their past. I played stickball with Moses and helped him write the 10 Commandments, but obviously, biblical scholars would refute that. I'm not going to go back and say, well, he wasn't there when Amadou Diallo and Amna Louima were brutalized by the police. But so were 35,000 other people. So he's not unique in that. What I am very concerned about, and I could care less where he lives, because if he had a house in New Jersey and he went there 7 times with his city car, if you really want to know if he's living in New Jersey, you take the easy pass on his personal car, because no one is stupid enough not to use their personal car if they're going to do something that might be scrutinized later. My biggest objection is during the last 8 years, we've had 3 police commissioners, and the mayor selected them. The mayor also divested himself and forced out the highest ranking African American in the police department, Philip Banks, the chief of department, and 3 of the highest ranking Latinos in the department. Ralph Pinero, the first deputy commissioner, Carlos Gomez, the chief of department, and Fausto Pichardo, the chief of patrol, my old job. All 4 of them were fantastically competent and dedicated executives and really could have been the police commissioner. But there was also Ben Tucker, who was the first deputy commissioner, that the mayor chose to appoint somebody else rather than Ben. The issue is that's a reflection on the mayor that says, hey, wait a minute, maybe this guy has a problem with blacks and Latinos. It's very clear he had a problem with Fausto Pichardo, because if you call the chief of patrol and send him to handle a house party, you're either looking to humiliate him or you don't know what you're doing. I was the chief of patrol for 3.5 years under Mayor Giuliani, and he never called me about a house party. That's to be handled by a sergeant at best, if not just the sector where the party occurs. So the mayor clearly did something against people of color that is unconscionable. And Eric Adams, who claims to be a great champion of civil rights and an advocate for diversity, was silent in all 4 of those instances. If he can be silent during those instances, and the passing over of Ben Tucker for 2 people who may not have been as qualified as Tucker to be the police commissioner, I don't know if I would want him leading the city. Forget where he lives, forget the fact that he might have been investigated for corruption, forget that he was a squeegee person, and all those other things that come along, because politicians are lying when their lips are moving. So I don't pay much attention to that. But I look at what's accomplished. If you looked at the debate Thursday night, the most important question that was asked by Marsha Kramer, who said, why should people trust you to be the mayor of the city when your borough is the one that is overrun with gun violence and has the most shootings in the entire city?
Right,
and
I was about to go there.
The answer was he dodged the question. He gave a roundabout answer. Anybody who lives in the city, that the police department is there when all of the other city agencies who have failed communities of color go home. When the teachers have left, when the social service providers put their phones on voicemail, the police are left to handle problems. Are the police flawed? Yes, every human entity is. But the police in this city do an overwhelming, horrific job. If you have this expertise as a police captain, then you should be able to share it with those who are your neighbors. Now, don't get tearful in front of your house because people want to see what's in your refrigerator. Go out to the places where people are shot and make sure that the police are acting as effectively as possible, and the community that elected you is getting the services that they require and
Bill, one of the things that really gets to me is that I think largely his campaign has been predicated on his past with the department. I think if the polls are to be believed, that's the number one reason people would want him as mayor. I mean, the city, with all due respect to de Blasio, is like out of control with the shootings. I'm not saying it's not happening in other parts of the country, but here it just seems to have gone off the charts.
Well, there's a problem that started at the beginning of the de Blasio administration. He ran on a ticket of being anti-police. He couldn't have groomed Maya Wiley any better to be critical of the police. And he has accomplished something that no other. I started in policing in 1968 and lived through the crisis in 1975 when Abe Beame laid off 5,300 police officers. They never turned their back on a mayor. The police have turned their back on the mayor because they believe the mayor does not support them and is going to do everything he can to emasculate and demonize the police. So as a result, you have a cumulative effect of the disengagement of police from City Hall and a person in City Hall who gives direction that is not based in sound principle for providing safety to the people of the city of New York. So what you're looking at now is rescue us. This is the same thing that happened in 1993, where The crack epidemic caused a tremendous amount of violence, and Mayor Dinkins responded by hiring 5,000 new cops. But there were people who thought that Mayor Dinkins was soft on crime. When Mayor Giuliani came in, he decided he was going to be the law and order candidate and got the cops motivated, going in the right direction. And as a result, you saw this 20-year decrease in crime. The mayor who comes in now has to do the same thing, has to get the police motivated, focused, stop talking about anti-crime and gun suppression units, form a partnership with the communities, and make sure that people are protected. You don't need to arrest people after the shootings. You need to prevent the shootings in the first place. And the way you do that is to get the police out there functioning properly, working with the community, and not talking about all of these other ancillary issues. Yes, those communities have poor schools. They certainly are underserved in terms of social services. However, there is no reason for people who look like us to shoot other people that look like us. And the only way that can be prevented is if there are police there doing the job that they were sworn to do. This mayor can't do it, and I'm really surprised at the back and forth, the vacillation between candidate Adams wanting to take credit for being in the police department and not embracing the police department and saying, okay, we know there are flaws. I'm going to dedicate myself to correcting those flaws. But overwhelmingly, the vast majority of police officers are doing what is needed to be done. And they can't do it under the leadership of a mayor who undermines them at every single term. I used to say when we had 40,000 people in the police department as a chief of patrol, if we had 1% of our officers making a mistake or doing something inappropriate, we would have a front page headline for every day of the year, right? Police make mistakes. There's no doubt about it. Some of it is training, some of it is people that don't belong there. But if you're a police captain, you should know exactly what's right about policing and should be able to inspire people more than you have.
Let me ask you something. As you mentioned that, you said 40,000 then. I think we're up to 44,000 now, if I'm not mistaken. I forgot.
No, I think we're down. I think we're down.
We're down from 40,000.
Yes.
Okay. What would be adequate for the city of New York?
You know, there were 17,000 people. There were 17,000 people in the department in the 70s. It grew up to 20,000, and it depends on what you wish to do. There is no specific number where you can say, if I had 41,306 police officers, there'd be no crime. No, it's how you deploy your officers. It's what their relationship is with the community. It's what feedback you get in terms of where you need from, CompStat is a numbers game, and it has its advantages and disadvantages, but you really have to get a handle on the data, where the crimes are occurring, deploy officers accordingly, and make sure that the officers there know why they're there and are addressing the specific problems that are endemic to that particular community. So the exact number could fluctuate. It was very interesting that during the time Bloomberg was the mayor, every time the police department reduced crime, he reduced the headcount, because his belief was, well, we don't need as many police officers because we have less crime. So now that we have greater crime, then we certainly shouldn't look to attrit the department any further, but we really need to look at what we're doing in terms of proactive policing. Are we preventing crime? The idea is not to have people shot. It's great that the finest detectives in the world make arrests after the crime has occurred, but the idea is to prevent the crime in the first place, and that's through having visible deployment of police officers, having them working with communities, having them understand who the good people are in the community versus those who are involved in illegal conduct, and making sure that the people who are involved in illegal conduct either don't commit the acts, or when they do, they're arrested immediately. So that's what has to be done. There's a complete disconnect, and that disconnect is something that has to fall on the steps of.
with de Blasio this past week saying that after the last horrific shooting, that I forgot which one because there've been so many, but I believe the young man in Far Rockaway, Queens, 10 years old. I mean, that was horrific. There was no need for that. But he was calling now about bringing in members of the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, and I never thought that they would be involved that way. It's part of their responsibility, I would imagine, but them working with the New York City Police, your take.
Well, it's funny that all of these people are reinventing the wheel. Back in the 1990s, when there was a tremendous amount of gun violence in the Bronx, some very smart detectives and police executives got together with the assistant U.S. attorney and the Bronx DA, and they decided that it would be a great idea to have federal days on gun arrests. And basically what that meant was if you were caught with a gun and you used the gun, you would get federal time. It would not be city time. And that's mandatory sentencing. That it did a tremendous amount with these gun cases being handled by a coalition of both city and federal partners. That did a tremendous amount to making sure that recidivism did not occur and that the gun violence was reduced. So it's fine, he can call in the ATF. By the time he calls in the ATF, my hair will grow back. I mean, I'm not impressed with that.
Okay. But you know, and then the other thing is that you hear all the time, and the former commissioner was on TV this week, Bill Bratton, he's got a book out, and the current commissioner said that the bail reform situation is, is a big problem. Your thoughts?
Well, what we're suffering from now is a result of the criminal justice system not policing itself. All right. Quite often, you get the impression that there are people outside of policing that don't know about policing as much as those inside, who are reacting to the fact that things have not gone the way they should have in policing or within the criminal justice system. So as a result, they impose their ideas. Yeah, there are people, the court system should work faster. There is absolutely no doubt about it. But there is nobody who will hold the court system accountable. The DAs decide what cases they will prosecute. The courts decide how many, the judges will decide what their load will be. And the police have absolutely no control over that. So now when you have lawmakers who see one or two things go wrong in their high profile incidents, well, we have to change the system. This is what went wrong with the anti-crime operation. Anti-crime is a fantastic and important component of getting criminals and guns off the street. If there are people who don't belong in anti-crime or who have done something inappropriate, then it's the responsibility of the police executives who are in charge of those officers to get them out of there. You cannot just throw out the baby with the bathwater. And that's what a lot of this prison reform has been. Basically, one or two people or a small percentage of people have not lived up to their specific oath of office. So now we're going to change the whole system and wind up making the police a member of a persecuted minority group. Part of it is their fault, but most of it is the result that by failure to police yourself, and the same thing, by failure to police yourself, other people who don't have an understanding or a sympathy for what you do will now decide what you will do. Body cameras are there because people don't trust the police. If people trusted what the police said, you wouldn't need body cameras.
Exactly, and it's so funny. I mean, I was just getting ready to segue to this point because we're on YouTube. This is a global audience. It can be seen anywhere in part of the world, any part of the world. I know we're talking about New York, but so goes New York, so goes the world in many instances. What could we do to curb some of the things that are going on across the country with regard to how the police are handling cases?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to realize that the police are the dentists of society. Nobody really wants to come and see us. But when the pain is inflicted, they want us to come and put it out right away. That's the wrong way to approach things. The idea is to make your society as positive a one as possible so that the police have minimal impact with anybody else other than those who are committing criminal acts. The school system, the education system is failing people. And no one seems to get excited about that. People who live in public housing live in horrible conditions. No one says anything about that except Chuck Schumer got $80 million, so now he found out that there were housing developers in New York. Thank you, Chuck. It's really good of you to be so to be such an advocate of the people of the city of New York. We have a homeless situation. Probably not as bad as Los Angeles, but you don't sweep them under the highway the way a certain police commissioner who worked in New York and LA did. The idea is these are people. Okay?
Call a name.
That's a reality. You cannot. Years ago, when I was the chief of patrol, John Chimney was the chief of department, and we tried to look at what we could do about all of the homeless people who were living in the subway tunnels. And John took a group of people service providers who went into the subway tunnels and looked to see how bad things were. And he found a city of residents there who would rather be in subway tunnels or ride the trains than go into
the shelter.
What is wrong with the shelter system that it hasn't been fixed through a number of mayors, whether it's Giuliani, Bloomberg, or de Blasio. What is so wrong with giving people who have emotional problems or don't have a home a roof over their head? Aren't we supposed to be the shining city on the hill where we take care of our poor or those who are in need? It seems to be no one will address the homeless problem, so they're on the train slashing people or doing other things. What governor let all of those people who were in state institutions out to save money in the budget and put them on the street?
I think they named the bridge after him recently, or was it?
Yeah, they should.
It was his son.
I refuse. I'm sorry. Easy pass or not. But these are all endemic problems that fall at the mayor's doorstep and the governor's doorstep. And what they do is, instead of addressing those specific shortcomings, they call the police in. And that's not the right approach. I remember 2 police officers that went with a doctor. There was David Dinkins had a program where a health professional went out with police officers when there was someone who was in distress. And this gentleman was 6'4" and 300 pounds and hadn't taken his meds. And he went after the doctor with a 10-inch kitchen knife. And if the officers hadn't been there, the doctor would have been killed. The doctor went out running from the place. I saw him. He said, "These officers saved my life." Let's ask the elected officials what they're doing for the homeless. I know they don't vote and they don't contribute to political campaigns, but they're people in this city and they're entitled to live in it.
Amen. And with that, unfortunately, we are virtually out of time. We could do hours. There's so many things to cover, and I know you just referenced Bill Bratton a moment ago. And the thing is, he has a book out, and I know we've been highly critical in the past 30 minutes. Anyone who had a problem with anything, we welcome you to this platform to discuss it. And it's always a pleasure to hear your thoughts on what's going on. I hope Mayor de Blasio, for whatever little time is left, is listening and heeding some of your advice, because you've been there. And Dr. Chapman, I'm so grateful that you could be a part of this today.
It was a pleasure, as always, to be in your presence, Wayne. Congratulations and good luck on the show. I'm not publishing a book. I'm not looking for a job. I just want to tell the truth to help the people who are out there doing a good job and trying to help New York City be better.
That's why you're so credible. And Bill, thanks again. We're out of time. We'll be having you back soon. And who knows, your phone will probably be ringing off the hook by the time we get off the air here. Anyway, thank you very much. This has been the Urban Algorithm. Wayne Gillman with you on the Our World Media Network. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you next week.